today. We have been working for a couple of weeks with requirements, how to identify requirements, what is a requirement, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, and so on. I need to move forward with the functional requirements, how to work them, how to use them to estimate. Now, before moving with that, I asked you to do a homework, a very simple project. I asked you to give me the requirements. You watch this video in which I explain what to do to a group of students. Number one, what I explain them to do is not the set of requirements, right? The explanation is, I want you to do this, this, and that. Is use these libraries, make this software, make this screen graphical user interface. But those things are not services, behaviors, or functionalities that you provide to the software. So as you remember, we talked about this. It is your work to identify in this dialogue between the customer and you, what are requirements. Good. So with that in mind, let's review your homework. Let's see what you did and whether or not that thing is correct. Number one, things that you know, and I want you to have in mind while we review your homework, some of your homeworks. We are looking for requirements. In particular, I asked you for the functional requirements. So I asked you for this, the functionalities, service, behaviors, reactions. So every line that I'm going to show you and that you submit, obviously for rating, is one of these three things. There is no other thing, right? Moreover, in your description, what you have is a verb, is an action. Those services, behavior, reactions are things that are going to be connected or expressed with a verb and extra information. But the important thing is we are looking for a verb. What is the action? Because that one is going to tell us what the software is going to supposed to do. Now, not the most important thing, but something that probably you did and is going to help us later. If you have a verb, an action, there should be a connection with an actor. We started working the previous week with this idea of what is an actor. And in fact, I think that I asked you in the quiz, like, what is an actor? Specifically, I want to review with you which are the actors in this project that I asked you to review. Moreover, after you have the verb and after you identify these services and so on, the big question about the best principles, and in particular about the letter S. Remember, what is small, really small, or still too big? Remember those things because we're going to use them to review your homework. So the invest, the verb, the functionalities. Let's check. Something that I recommend you to do, and it was not mandatory, obviously, is to think about a requirement as the heading of this document, in which the title is your project, the one that I asked you to review. Several headings, sections represent the requirement, and there is always a paragraph that describes the details of what that requirement is going to be. So you're looking for the title of a heading. You're looking for something that describes a set of paragraphs that have the details. Some of you use bullets, which was good. The only thing that I am going to review with you, the only thing that I want to analyze here is the titles. So you're going to notice that I am going to show you homework, some of you, but I am not showing the details. I am not showing the paragraphs. I don't care about the paragraph yet. We're going to go there later. So far, I want to review the heading because that is your requirement. So for the heading, let's see. What was the system? And I want to remember this for you when you are reviewing the text that I am going to show. Let's see. I asked you to create a system, and I showed you in the video this picture. This picture is the graphical user interface of the system. Help me. the graphical user interface, this picture, and the description that I have here in the slide with this bullet. This graphical user interface, a requirement, a functional requirement, yes or no? You can answer in the video, you can answer in the chat. I am reading, good, I have 4 answers. Okay, no, there. What about this menu? The menu? That was tricky, right? My question, and I am going to show you some answers, is if I want a menu that is a functional requirement, yes or no? And I agree with your answer now, is the menu. But what I am asking you is, the menu is a service. The menu is a behavior. The menu is a reaction. The menu is a functionality. And hopefully you agree with me. No. The menu is a trigger for the action. The menu is this place that I use to access the action. But the menu per se, or the graphical user interface, those are not services. Yes, I am telling you that you are going to be programming something like I asked in the video. And that something, even though involved programming, is not a requirement. It's not a requirement because it's not a service, functionality, behavior. It's something that the customer wants. Yeah, but not everything that the customer wants we classify as a requirement, as a functional requirement. Someone mentioned in the chat, it's a non-functional, and I totally agree with that. The graphical user interface implies several different widgets that you use to create your applications. The menu, the panels, the bars, and so on.
Can you see my screen?
All that is part of this particularity. And that is connected with usability. And we can connect that usability with these non-functional requirements. Why? Because we're talking about quality or constraints. You can think about the graphical user interface as something that is going to help us with the quality of the software, usability in particular, or something that is a constraint. You have the constraint that the system should be graphical user interface in a desktop application. It's not going to be web, or it's not going to be a mobile application. If you want to solve that as a constraint, it's non-functional. It's not a functionality. But I am going to show you specific examples. Anyway, from this screen, hopefully the only thing that you get is a view of what the application is going to be. But so far here, I am not describing to you any particular functionality. One small exception, and I'm going to make this parenthesis. The only exception that we could make, small, could be that one. Again, an exception. Hey, it is a functionality that somehow the application is going to tell me the contact information for the developers, or who is the developer of this. It's a service that you're going to give me, provide information about who create you. We can argue about it, and equally, it's the only thing in this screen that you can think about. Okay, it's a service that we're going to give, show me the information. But the graphical user interface, the menu, those are usability things, point access for the functionalities. Good. Now, in the video, we continue with this. I show you each menu and what options are going to be in each menu. Again, are these requirements, like this item, this item, this item, this item? Menu items are required. Yep. Let me tell you this, and I am going to answer the chat. Number one, the dialog box in which you are going to show the information, the about, that is part of the graphical user interface. The dialog box, the menu, again, the bars, the panels. But the fact that you're going to show me inside of a box or in some place this information about something, the requirement is not the dialog box. The requirement is I am going to ask you something that you are going to do is provide information. Information about, again, whatever, the group of developers, your team, something. But the service that you are going to give me, and the reason because I put this box here, is you are going to give me information. Information that we call the about information. That is the functionality from this screen. Give that information. Provide that information to the user. Give the user that is a service that you are going to implement. It doesn't matter that it's going to be a dialog box or any other thing. So this small box here, provide that information, functional. Everything else, the graphical user interface, non-functional graphical user interface, usability. Here, a tricky question, and be careful. Good point. I mentioned this. This is the only one that I could agree that could become a functional requirement. This is the only one that I want to say, like, maybe. Everything else, there is no question about no. The graphical user interface, no. The menu, no. The status bar, no. All of those non-functional, bye. I do not want to talk more about that. However, I mentioned for the about, like, okay, it's a service. Now, is it small or not? We need to review that. What exactly I asked you to show me as about information, because remember, so far I am talking about, okay, there is going to be this about information. What is that? What do we need to do? That is something that we need to research in order to answer this question about, is it small? It can be done quickly. Is the work of one person? We need to review that. But it's the only one open to discussion. The rest is just the graphical user interface, and that is non-functional. Moving here, connecting with the menu. I asked the tricky question. If these elements in the menu are requirements, be careful. The elements in the menu items per se, they are not the requirements. The requirement was not or is not to have those items in the menu. Now, they are going to be access points. Access points to what? To requirements. The requirement per se is going to be the action that I am going to trigger. And I am going to trigger those actions probably using these links. So the requirement, for instance, is in some point, I am going to ask you, or I ask you to save the information, to create a CSS file and put there the information and la la la. Save the file or save the information. That is a requirement. That is a functionality. That is a behavior. This menu item there is going to be the access point to that functionality. It's going to be the access point to that action. Having this menu item is not yet a requirement, because that is not the functionality, the item is the connection to the functionality. When you answer my question, like, these are requirements, I am sure that you were thinking about not these guys here in the screen, but you were thinking about, well, I am going to click there and something is going to happen. The functionality, the requirement is that something that is going to happen later, right? Yeah. So the triggers, the access points, the functionalities, the requirements are what is going to be in the back. Good. So this is a suggestion to something that can become a requirement, loading a roster. This is a suggestion that something that will become a requirement, loading the attendance. These two are files that you need to read, remember? So load the information of the roster, load the information of the attendance. Those are kind of two databases or two files that I am asking you to read in the system. So to save, I talked about this before. This is another one that is a functionality. In some point, I am asking you to save. Notice that in the description, there are two related to open because there are two files or two data sets that I am asking you to load, but there is only one save because something that is going to happen later is one of the requirements is that I am asking you to put these two together and then those two become only one file, but we're going to talk about it. Finally, something that I asked you to do is to upload data. That is another thing that is going to be something that the system is going to do. And so this one are clearly suggestions about what could be the requirements of this system. Again, I am not telling you that these are ready to be the requirements, these lines, because they have some technical content, but at least there are going to be 4 requirements around that. And if I consider the about as a requirement, after we review the size, the small or not, so far I am thinking about 5 requirements, just reviewing these 2 slides, right? There are more. Now, here, something that I did is start describing the details of what I was expecting my students to do. As you notice, this is a project for 360 undergrads, software engineering, they are programming something. This. Hopefully you agree with me and you read, listen the video. Those 2 bullets are just technicalities, details, nothing that we're going to use for specifying requirements. We do not ask for a particular class to be used. The format of the file that we're going to read is part of the extra information that we can put in the requirement. Data is going to be in a CSV, so you're going to read data from a file, and the file is that format, extra information, but none of them are alone requirements. You cannot tell me that this is requirement 1 and this is requirement 2. No, this is technicality, goodbye. This is extra information. This should be inside of a particular requirement, probably inside of one of these. That is the requirement, and this is extra information for that requirement. You're going to load the roster, and the roster is a CSV file. One thing, one service to provide. Read the file. Read is the same that load. I am using 2 verbs, but as a customer, I am telling you, engineers, we're going to read a file, we're going to load data. Your work, you need to identify that the customer is talking about exactly the same. So you do not have one requirement load data and another requirement read data, because again, they are the same, right? Professor, it's too obvious. Hopefully, we're going to review your submission. Now, I give you the description of the file, the CBS file, details. Again, I am giving you details because this is the instructions for the students to do the implementation. But this, the headers or the fields, the columns and the rows, details, none of them is alone a requirement. All of them are information that you can add in these paragraphs of a particular requirement. The requirement is load the data, maybe load the roster data, and the details is okay, it's a CBS file. Moreover, that CBS file have these columns, and you can add as many details as you need for the developer. Similar thing I did with the visualization of the data. I described to you like, okay, once you read the data, the file, I want you to display the data on the screen. I asked you for this, and I put these particularities in red. Tell me, What do you think? Do we have a requirement here talking about showing the data? Yes or no? Because remember, we talked before about show my name in the corner, right? And we agreed that, okay, show your name in the corner of the screen is not a requirement. But in the previous lecture, we talked about show the Pacman. And we agreed that, okay, show the Pacman is a requirement, or show the ghost. Now I am asking, show this data, the roster. Can we think about that as a requirement? And I have yes and no. We need to review the invest. But so far, for this option, I will say the same thing that I said before with the about. Yes, maybe. Yes, why? It's a service. It's something that I want the system to do. I mean, one thing is I want the system to read the data. Reading the data do not imply show me the data, right? You can read the data and keep the data in the memory, period. But a different thing is, okay, I want the system to show me the data. Show me the data. These are kind of details, right? I want you to show me the data, and in particular, I want you to show me the data in a table. Details. But what I am asking is, show me what you get from the file. So far, I can think it's a service, it's a functionality, it's something that you system are going to do. Therefore, I would say, yeah, that could be a functional requirement. We need to review the invest. If this pass the invest, this will be our sixth requirement. Remember, I mentioned before for about, and now I have this visualization. I am thinking about, okay, maybe this will be six requirements for the system that you produce. Yeah, loading and reading. In general, something that I did with this project, guys, this is a project for undergraduate students, right? It's a project for undergraduate students doing a piece of software. This project can be done by one person in one day. Any of you can do this project in a moment. So per se, if we think about the size in terms of what I asked them to do, everything is small. However, here, what I am going to introduce is the good design principles. And talking about the design principles, if you are going to load data, doesn't matter what are you going to do, how you're going to load the data. Doesn't matter that in this case particularly is less than 10 lines, 20 lines of code or 10. Loading the data per se is going to be one requirement. Moreover, it's going to be one class connected with one interface. Why? Thinking about extensibility. Thinking about right now is loading the data from a CSV file, but tomorrow could be a database. So you never put together, or you never include load the data, use like a method in a class or source code in the main method, because you do not know what is going to happen with the evolution of the software. Good design is one class for loading, one class for saving. And if we're thinking about those are going to be one class, we know that they are going to be one class because our skill designing. Right now, they are going to be one requirement. Even though right now the implementation is 20 lines or less, is because the extensibility of those functionalities, is because what could happen with them, is because we do not know yet about the details of the implementation, the technicalities. For this scenario, we're moving with the easy solution. But the general solution, loading or saving, it could evolve to something else. And we need to isolate that part in one particular place, in one particular module in the system. So we can separate them, even though they are too small. And the reason is basically they are small, yes. But if we consider the average of the requirements that we're going to have, all of them are relatively small comparing with other systems. But compared with the average here, they are in good size. Display the data in the table. You know what? You are going to need more code, more lines of code to do this than the lines of code that you're going to need to load the file or save the file. So again, considering the average, that is a good number of lines. at least average compared with the previous one. If you're thinking about another project that you have done before, every single task here is small. Every single task here is going to be less than 20 lines. Anything that I ask this team to do is small. Again, an undergrad project. Good. Attendance, very similar. I am not going to stop in that, but attendance is another file, also a CSV, also need to be load, and is going to be show. But here, showing is not the important part, because if you remember, attendance is not going to be shown in a different place. Basically, what I ask you to do is attendance is going to be merged with the roster. You're going to put together the file, and therefore the data with the data that you have before, and looks like you're going to visualize that thing, the new data and the merge in the same place. So this becomes to visualize here, and looks like we're visualizing both. We're visualizing the roster and we're visualizing the attendance. And if you think about it, this like makes sense, right? The roster is all your names with your information as students. And it's like, well, there is one extra column in which I am going to be showing whether or not you are here today, your attendance for the day. And there are going to be more days. And then it's going to be a column for that particular day, whether or not you are there. Could you agree with me that the key idea in all this slide is this action, merge? Could we think about this merge as another requirement? Now, obviously, we already have loading the data. Load the data is one thing, but then after having these two data load, the roster and the attendance, two different things, put together these two files in one, in the memory or whatever. Looks like that is a process that the system is going to do, right? Can we think about a functional requirement for putting the data together, for merging the two files, for combining the information, whatever you want? Hopefully, yes.
Professor, it's just one line code, and while visualizing the table, we can just get that code and be done with it. I don't think so it's required to get that as a requirement.
Well, I'm not talking yet about visualization. Visualization is going to be more than one line, but I am talking about merge the data, put the data together. I am talking about, and this is important, merge the data is not just adding the data to the graphical user interface. I am talking about all this data here is a data structure in the memory. I am talking about you have in the memory this array of objects, and each object have all these things. And what you're going to do is at least a traversal for all the objects, and you're going to date things there. And this attendance, the different dates, could be another array inside of the array in which you are going to add a new date, and for that date, an integer number that represents the number of minutes that you were there. So at least a for loop, and that for loop is going to be controlled for the number of entries in the file. And remember that I mentioned the file could have more than one time your name, your ID, because you were connected 5 minutes and then you were connected 10 minutes. And something that we need to do is to put together those two like 15 minutes. Can we think that that could be, again, could be a requirement? And hopefully you agree with me, it could be. So we need to visualize, save. I already talked about saving. And finally, I ask you to put a plot. I ask you to do this chart, right? And that was the thing. So let's review what we have. Let's see. After all these things, what I noticed as things that I remember that could be requirements, things that I am going to put over the table when I talk with my team, because I am sure that you did the following, hopefully. I am going to work in a team with 3 people, right? I make my team is myself and 2 more. And what we did is each of us watch the video. It doesn't matter if each of us watch the video in a different computer or we all together watch the video on the TV, but each of us need to be listening to the customer, watching the video, listening to the customer, because all this information come to your brain, right? First, individually. And then you are going to start talking with your team. Like right now, I am going to start talking with you. You are my team, all of you together. And the idea that I am going to put over the table, like, hey guys, after I check the video or after I talk with the customer, in this context of this particular project, right? We need to set up this border. What I think we could have as requirements, what I remember that this project is asking us to do, and the 4 things that we need to review in detail later, is the following. And help me if this makes sense to you. Help me if this is something that you could agree. The first thing that I think we identified that could be a requirement, could be a service or functionality, was the about. Did you notice that the customer is asking us to show information about us, about our company, about who we are? Show the information of the company, show the information of the team, show that information of who create this thing. That is the first thing that I could identify and put over the table, like this could be a service or functionality. Number 1. Again, I am not telling you it is, I am telling you it's the first thing that I identify, like something that is worthy to evaluate. 1. 2, for sure, I think that the customer wants us to load a roster, read a roster. I don't know if those 2 words cover the options that you could have, but any other synonym of loading data, reading data. But the point is, the customer wants us to go to the disk, open a file, read every row there, and put that information in the memory. In the memory, remember, the screen is a different thing. Now, thinking about loading, I think the same thing is happening with this attendance. Looks like the customer wants us to read some documents, some kind of Excel files, CSV files, in which there are only 2 columns, but well, we need to read that and also put that information into the memory. So the about, read the roster, read the attendance. Hey, but there are several different attendance files. Yeah, but all of them have the same format. So we care about like the classes, right? We're going to read attendance. If we're going to read attendance 20 times, still is read attendance, the same service, but running 20 times. We don't care about how many times. Hopefully you agree. 3 things. Now, also the customer is asking me for saving the data. Saving the data. Which data? You put together the 2 files that you read, or the 1 roster and the 20 attendance. All of them, you need to put them together. Merge, the one that we mentioned before, right? Or another synonym. So merge and then save. And it's save only the information that we already merged. We do not save again these 2. So 5 things. What else? Plotting the data. There is something in the video. It was the last part. And I think the customer mentioned something about plotting data. 6 things to do. There is a non-functional requirement because looks like this guy wants a graphical user interface, and this is an application. And if you want to continue with the non-functional, it's like, oh, I think in some point I mentioned I want Java. So, okay, multi-platform, because maybe you have a Windows machine, but my TA or myself, we have a Mac computer, so we want to be able to run your system. As a summary, best case scenario or worst case scenario, 6 requirements, no more. Maybe you have less because maybe you think that the about is not big enough. that is a different conversation. Right now, I am trying to establish kind of the most requirement that I can get here. Can I get 6? I think so. Can I get 10, 20, 40, 100? And hopefully your answer is no way. 10, something is going to be wrong if I have 10. 2 non-functional. I didn't ask you for the non-functional. So the non-functional exists. I mentioned the Java, I mentioned the graphical user interface, they exist. However, I think that for the homework, my recommendation, my request was to focus into the functional. No problem. If you mention the non-functional and you notice there that, hey, these are non-functional, basically what the TA, what myself is doing is to ignore those. Right now, I am not concerned with the non-functional. Good if you mention, good if you do not mention. What I want to review right now and what we focus in the revision of your homework is the function. What you think is a functional requirement. Therefore, right now, could you agree with me that the magic number for functional 6 or less, but 6 is my magic number so far?
Yeah. Hi, Professor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, please continue.
Yeah, Professor. So my doubt was, it's a user requirement to report the non-roster student who has attended the meeting, right?
You are right. I think I mentioned 6, and I forget to mention the child information, right? So really, my magic number should be 7. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mentioned before this, right? I mentioned before, like, hey, show is going to be maybe a requirement. We need to review size, but I didn't mention in my count right now. So 7, yeah. 7
and one more, Professor. I don't know if it is a small requirement, but what about only so there is a catch in this. You gave a requirement saying that non-roster student name should be reported to the user, but his name should not be consolidated and shown on the Excel sheet. So does that become a requirement as well?
Yeah, very good point. Right now, when I mention this 7, I am thinking about merge. And when I mention merge, I am thinking about this merge that is doing everything, right? Something that is going to happen, I want to discuss with you, but something that some of you did, and I agree with that, something that I should do is the merge process is too big. And it's too big because it's doing a lot of validations, including that one. Like what happened if someone is in the attendance, but is not in the roster, and then I ask you to do a report and so on. That is something that you can split, separate from the merge. My best case scenario is merge is one thing, and validation, that thing that you described, is another thing, is another requirement. Yes. So okay. I could have now 8 as a magic number with that correction. Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Professor.
Oh, thank you. So guys, my point is this. I am not going to grade your homework like, okay, you have 6 or 7 or 8 and you are good or bad. What I want you to have in your mind is core idea. The core idea of the requirement is this 7, 8, and anything that is like, okay, some of you may be considered too small the about, and therefore it's not going to be there. So you're going to have less requirements. Some of you are going to split the merge in more parts. I mentioned 2, I will use 2, but maybe some of you split that in 4 or 6 parts. So if you have these 7 ideas and maybe less, one of this is missing, or these 7, but suddenly you have 10, but they are 10 because one of these is split in 4 parts. All that variations is something that we can discuss, because as you notice, I haven't told yet about the invest. The only thing that I mentioned is things that could be requirements. And I am using only this service, functionality, behavior, reaction as a parameter. I want to review with you what you think are requirements. And I want your help to tell me correct or not first. And then we create the list of requirements, the list that we can use to continue with the exercise. So 7, 6, 8, the things that we have been talking here, looks like those could be requirements, looks like those could be the things that should be in your homework. What do you think about the following answers? Yeah, that validate. I mean, I am reading some of the comments in the chat. They are everyone, yeah. Those validations should be in some place, like the last one. The system should not do something. Remember, those validations are if-else conditions. Per se, alone, they are instructions. They should be inside of a method. Therefore, per se, they should be part of one requirement. They should be part of the details of things that one requirement is going to imply. I mentioned before the word validations. So validations could be several different things that we need to validate. Merge is going to be some kind of merge that is going to imply maybe two loops, and inside of the loops, one condition. The names represent more than one line of source code. It's good to think about any requirement. It's not going to be a line. It's going to be at least a method or a class, a set of methods. That is the mindset that I want to put in your side. Now, with that mindset, with that global understanding, what do you think about these answers? And the reason because I am showing you this is to avoid similar answers in the exam. Well, not all of them, but some of them. Let's see. The question in the chat, if I create a graphical user interface for loading the data, is that a requirement? I will say the requirement is loading the data. That is the requirement. Now, the details of that requirement include, for instance, what I asked you to do, like, oh, you need to show a dialog box in which you select the file in a graphical way, right? This showing the graphical interface for selecting the file is a step, is a detail, is something that you put inside or as a detail of the requirement. The requirement is loading the data because it's the functionality that you want to provide in the system. The system is able to load the data. For loading the data, okay, you need to ask me for the path of the file. Okay, but usability, ask me for the path. Do not ask me to write the path. Ask me about the path with a graphical interface. That in this case was the dialog box that you know. So load the data requirement, yes. The graphical user interface for that alone is just part of the requirement, not the requirement per se. Good. Okay. Silence hopefully means yes. Screens. What do you think about this? And hopefully you're reading my screen right now. Let's see. One by one, I would like your help, probably with the chat, or you can speak. What do you think about present a menu bar to interact with the system? The sentence number one in this slide is a requirement.
It's a non-functional requirement.
Exactly. I am going to talk and I am going to evaluate functional requirements, right? Let's focus on that. So that one, the menu bar, etc., it is not a functional requirement. Again, it's not a service, it's not a reaction, it's not a functionality. It's part of the non-functional that we call using a graphical user interface. Is part of this quality with the usability. Talking about functional requirements, that is the thing that I want to talk here, the thing about your homework, probably the question that you're going to have in the exam. Number one is not a functional requirement. Agree? Good. What about the number two?
Maybe, but it is a very small requirement.
That one is the one that we called before the about, right? Could agree. Is the one that we call the about thing. View the team details. I am assuming is speaking about that, the team that developed the software. That one could be. That could be, as we mentioned before, remember, I told you, showing the about could be a service, could be something that the system should do for the user, something that the user wants. We have this question about the size. Okay, but could be, at least in this list, I could say for this team, showing the team information, they decide that the size was good enough, and therefore they decide that is a functional requirement. And I will say, okay. Why okay? Because I haven't told yet about the sizes. I haven't told yet about the invest. I think that I can make a case for it's too small. Some of you are making that case, but I am sure that the team, if this is your answer, you can make a case for why you consider that this is a good size. Make a case. It is not a solid answer, no, like the previous one. One is not a functional requirement. That's it, no discussion. The number two could be, like we mentioned before, is the about one, is one of the 7, 8 that we mentioned before. The two could be good. For your exam, you put this as an answer, I will say, okay, no objection. Could be, you consider that it is, fine, is one functionality. Number 3.
It's a functional requirement.
Agree with that. Remember, load the roster. I am not evaluating the sentence. You are going to notice I am going to show several different answers, several different themes. I want you to notice that you can express the same idea in different ways. But when I read this number 3, I basically read here the action, load, roster, and that is the information that I need. The verb is loading, and you are telling me the roster, and it's important that you mention the roster because you are going to load also the attendance. So there are 2 things to load, and it is important to be specific that this number 3 is about loading the attendance. So I could say number 3, yeah, why not? Could be. Number 4.
Yes, it is.
With modification or like that? Okay, I agree with the number 4, but something that I could want to point out to you guys, all the previous ones are almost full invest, are in good shape. You can review the letters, they are going to match. We can discuss the small for one of them, but mostly every else is going to be okay. This one, the 4, I think we get the idea, but I invite you to read. And it's like, okay, you are talking about adding the attendance, like reading the file that have the attendance and also merging the information, or you are thinking about adding the attendance like in the graphical user interface, or you are talking about adding the attendance once the information is loaded in the memory. I am not telling you that is wrong. I am telling you could be confused. And I just described 3 different options. 3 different options that come to my mind. Why? Because of this verb, add. Add could suggest the graphical user interface, which is not what I described in the video. Add could suggest reading the file, like adding to the memory. Or add could suggest this merge process, like you already load 2 files, and then you're going to add one of them into the other, merge, really. Which one is the one that I am describing here? Probably something that we need to do with this one is to split. Split add is load the file, and the merge process that we described. It could be too big if this add means both things, or at least could be some kind confusing if we do not understand all the team the same thing about what is the meaning for add. So that is my only comment for the 4. But if you put this add like load the attendance, or this add like merge with the attendance, could be okay. Is a functionality that we can improve. Yeah.
Professor, do you mean
So
it is not negotiable as we do not
That-
have clarity?
That is my point. This sentence, as it is, used like that, have a problem of negotiation. Why? Because it's not clear. I have no full understanding here with this one about what do you mean by adding. So my recommendation is this one. This one is really something that you need to separate into load and probably merge. And that is what mean this add. But just like it is, we have a problem of negotiation. I agree with that. It's confusing.
Professor, I had a doubt about main menu being not very functional, because in that you ask like it should contain files and about, and the file should be a drop-down menu, and it should contain 4 buttons. So why it's not considered a functional requirement? Because it's describing a behavior, right? Of
Yeah,
file button, right?
Yeah, guys, the important thing here is functional requirements are things that the system is going to do for the user, problems that the system is going to solve. All this description about the graphical user interface, and I spent a lot of time describing exactly what kind of graphical user interface I wanted for the system. The full graphical user interface with all the details that I provide, the menu, the panels, and even if I describe the colors for the fonts and so on, all of that is just about the usability that I am looking for. All of that is about this quality or constraint that I am including to your system. But that one, none of that is about a service or a functionality, something that the system is going to do for me. That is the point, is non-functional. And I know that this is the part that is confusing, because it's like, Professor, you are telling me that it's not functional, but it's something that I am going to be programming. And moreover, it's something that the computer is going to do. The computer is going to be drawing this menu bar, and the computer is going to draw these menu items there. It's going to happen. Yeah, it's going to happen. Yeah, it's programming. Yeah, include lines of code. It's not something that the system provides as a service to the users. Think about this. The university provides to you several services, several. And I am sure that you go to the window and someone is there and take your order, ask you what I can do for you. All that graphical user interface, the color of the desk, the clothes of the person that is attending to you, the decoration for Halloween and so on, is usability, is image for the university, is not the service that we provide to you. The service is giving you that paper that you need, the signature that you are looking for, enrolling you in a class, and so on. But the decoration for Halloween, even though it's for you to enjoy, is not a service. Makes sense? Maybe, hopefully.
Professor, I had a question about point number 4.
Yeah, please.
Would this be okay? Like the user shall be able to load the class attendance information for a user selected date.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, be careful in that, because, I mean, that sentence that you mentioned is good.
Mhm.
However, maybe it's not exactly what I described in the video, because what I described in the video is you load the file, one file, and then the system asks you what is the date that corresponds to that file. So it's like, number one, the user should be able to load a file. Good, it's a file, no question asked. But then when you're going to do the merge, the merge process. That is the one that I think is asking for the date, because you are going to put a new column. That new column is going to have as a title the date, and this information is going to go to that column. And if by any chance that column already exists, it's going to be replaced by the new file. So the date is needed not to loading, but for the merge process, because it's going to be the name of the new column, or maybe the column that already existed is going to be updated. Good.
Understood. Yes, thank you.
Good. So the last two in this slide, to move to the next one, export the roster. My understanding is this is what we described before as save, right? Export, save the data. The only thing that I will mention here for everyone, be careful, because it's not export the roster data only, right? Because what we're going to save, or what we're going to export, is this roster plus attendance, right? So again, in this scenario, the requirement is a functional requirement, yes. Instead of using save, you use export, no problem. We understand that that file is going to be created. The only tricky part, the only noisy part, something that you would like to kind of fix is, do not tell me that it's going to be only the roster, because in that moment, we can have a disagreement about like, oh, you only save the roster, but you already have the roster. You are going to save the roster plus the new information that you have added, that we call it attendance before, right? So just careful with that last part. The extra information in this case is being confused. The last one, view the roster data, agree with that. We mentioned that as a showed information, right? Similar comment that before, view the roster data, and I maybe will add here, and the attendance after you add that, or if you add that. Because yes, view the data, good, but you remember, at the beginning is the roster, but then we are using exactly the same place, exactly the same view for the roster and for the new attendance. Now, tricky question here. Professor, for the Pac-Man video game, you have view the Pac-Man as one requirement and view the ghost as another requirement. You have two requirements, one for each of the two guys. Could we have a requirement view roster and another one view attendance? Yes or no? Or maybe it's better to have only one view, and it's going to be view the roster with the attendance. Let me describe the process because it's tricky, obviously. That is the reason because I mentioned this. Guys, what is going to be the implementation of this? And I am asking about the implementation not because the requirements depend on the implementation. I am asking about the implementation because if we think about how we are going to implement this, then we understand what is going to happen, right? What is going to be the process. Totally. If you tell me that one requirement is show the roster and another requirement is show the attendance, the first thing that comes to my mind is there are going to be two different panels. Two different panels, one panel for the roster and one panel for the attendance. Why? Because each requirement is going to be done by one developer, and two developers cannot be working in the same panel. Each developer works in its own class, its own file. Both files can extend JPanel, so I am going to have two panels, and each panel could have its own table. So if you tell me show the roster in one table or in one panel, and the attendance is going to be in another table with another panel, I will agree to requirements. In particular, in the system that I described in the video, looks like it's the same panel, looks like it's the same table. Could be one requirement? My answer is one requirement. Why? Then you are using the and. Yeah, but I am not using the and for the verbs. It's the same verb, show. And show two things. Think about the implementation, and that is going to justify my selection. My selection is the following. You're going to load the data from the file. That data is going to go to the memory in a data structure. You are going to load the attendance from a file. That data is going to go to the memory, to another data structure. I don't care which data structure, but I need to have the data in the memory. Then, in some point, you are visualizing something. Can it be possible that what I am visualizing is a data structure? Can it be possible that the only thing that I am doing, putting on the screen, is the data that I have in a particular place in the memory? Remember, the Pacman is not the Pacman in the memory. The Pacman is X, Y coordinates in the memory. So you have this data here. You have this data here, the two files. What are you visualizing is this pen. And could it be possible that this one here, at the beginning, you put all this data, the roster? So the only reason because at the beginning the roster is on the screen is because this data that you loaded, you included here, and this is the guy that you're visualizing, though at the beginning you're visualizing only the roster. What happens when you load something else, attendance, one or more? You load the data here, but then you run a process for merge. And when you run the process, what are you going to run is a process to merge two data structures, this data structure and this data structure. You're going to merge one time, two times, three times, any number of times. Can I think about this requirement of visualizing the information like whatever is here, only the roster, or the roster with one attendance, or the roster with 100 attendance? Use whatever is here, put in the screen, in a table and so on. If I think about that implementation, is one requirement. One requirement, copy, move whatever you have in the memory here to the screen, period. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of conditions, if, else, to create a column or not for the different attendance. Maybe to add the scroll bars or not. That is a different story. But your requirement, visualizing information, is to copy that structure for the memory to the screen, period. What about attendance? We already have the requirement of merging the attendance. After I merge, whatever is displayed to the screen, another requirement. Again, this is what is described in the video because I show only one panel and only one big table. And my solution is, okay, that is one data structure. If I show you the system in a different way, and I show you two tables, two panels or whatever, then I agree with the previous solution. The one that we have with the Pacman and the Ghost, remember? Because the Pacman and the Ghost are two things that move separate, are two data structures. The data structure with the X and Y of the Pacman, the data structure with the X and Y of the Ghost, and these are separated. If they were together, they could be one requirement. Draw both. Makes sense? Silence, maybe, okay.
Professor, I have a doubt here.
Yeah.
Since we have one functionality that is displaying the data structure as a table format, it's something like reusability of code in two different places. What if we approach the entire scenario in this way, that there are two places where we are searching for a file and saving the file? So instead of having load roster and add attendance, what if we think of it like there is a search option and an upload option? Like, for example, my assignment, when I'm uploading, first there's a place where I can give the path or search for the path from my local. That can be one functionality. And in case I want to change it, I can change it. And there is another upload button which uploads and saves the data in some data structure. So can we think of this as two separate save or search functionality and upload functionality? Upload and save the data in a data structure.
Yeah, it is possible, yes. At this moment, what I will do is this conversation with the customer. Because what I did, if I think that my video is myself in the customer, what I did is I ignore that possibility of the search that I agree with you could be useful and could be there and should be there maybe, but I ignore that. What I did, and it's a bad decision as a customer, but something that I did for my undergrad is like, don't worry, if the column exists, replace, and if do not exist, add. Not exactly the best idea. The best idea should be the one that you described. Is somehow you need to tell me if the column exists or not. Somehow maybe you need to search for that column. The idea is good. The only thing is, it's not what the customer, myself in the video, described. So good idea, yes, need to be discussed with the customer. If we go with what is in the video only, it's not that idea, right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Professor.
Yeah.
One last question I had. So this question is regarding the splitting that attendance and merge into two parts. So since the user will never be able to merge the attendance without uploading the attendance, and I understand that merge by itself is not a very small requirement, but isn't that dependent on the uploading and attendance part? So shouldn't that be a sub part of?
Yes, guys, something that I need to do, and this is my next thing, is remember that the last day in the whiteboard, I put the actor, and then I put some circles representing requirements. And so far, the only thing that I have done is to connect requirements with actors. That is the only line that I have drawn before. Something that I need to introduce, something that I need to talk about is, we can have two requirements, like is the case right now with load and the adding the attendance. And I think was the case before with moving the Pac-Man and collision, something. Sometimes there are two requirements that are going to be connected because they are related, because one cannot happen without the other, or because one needs the other. That is going to happen, and we need to talk about it. So yeah, I have one example with the Pac-Man, and I have some examples here that I am going to use later. Guys, before we go, and I run out of time, what do you think about these requirements here? And I move quickly to something that I get from another homework. Menu module, attendance module.
No, menu models.
Okay, the ideas are good, because if you think about attendance module, for instance, you are talking about attendance, and you notice that we talk about attendance several times here. So attendance is one requirement, it's related with one requirement, but my point is, what we need right now is to specify the service or the action is loading the attendance or merge the attendance. But if you tell me the module, yeah, I understand what is a module, but the module have inside several things. You are not telling me what are you going to do with attendance. And again, we discovered that these two things, loading and merging. Save the data, we talk about save the data, plot the graph, plotting is another requirement, load the roster, we talk about it. Not exactly the best thing to do to put kind of class names for the requirements. I would prefer a longer sentence. The only thing that you need to be careful is the first one, menu module. Again, my main point today, the menu is not a service functionality or functional requirement. It uses the graphical user interface for usability, therefore non-functional requirement. Good, guys. See you next lecture.